Hello, welcome to my podcast. Here we will talk about suicide with compassion and no judgment. For more information on suicide, go to understandsuicide.com. Hello, welcome to my podcast. For those who didn't listen to part 1, I'm going to do part 2 of my interview with Leslie Storm. In part 1, she talked from the point of view of a survivor because she lost her husband to suicide. Now, on part 2, she's going to talk as a counselor because she treats survivors. She's a facilitator for a support group, so she understands a lot about suicide grief. So welcome back, Leslie, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time and generosity to be here with me again. So, counselor, what have you learned from patients about suicide and suicide grief that maybe you didn't know when you went through your loss?
How important listening is.
Yeah, and I remember in part 1 of this interview, you said that back then when you lost your husband, which was how many years ago?
34.
34 years ago, the stigma was immense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it has ameliorated over the years. But back then, your family would never say the word suicide.
No.
And they never talked about it. They refused to even accept the idea that it was a suicide. So this is something that with your patients, you have learned to, maybe with your experience, you have been able to help your patients with.
Yeah, I've encouraged them to talk about whatever it is they need to talk about, that there's nothing that can't be discussed. And I just listen. I listen and I watch the tears, and, you know, it's so sad. It's so sad. But to me, I get a lot out of it. I just get a lot out of being able to share my experience and feel that perhaps there's something in my experience that can be helpful to my client.
And it also brings them closer to you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that a lot of them come because they know that you've been through this kind of loss too.
It's true.
How do you think that connection happens? Is it something that it's immediate, or does it need more time? Do they come to you and immediately start talking about it because they know?
Well, I think that varies. Some people will start in right away, and other people, it takes them let's say we're in a group setting, and other people it's going to take maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks. But I can pick up on what a sense of relief they feel once they've started to talk about it, and when they're hearing from their other group members that they've been through similar things. And there's a camaraderie that becomes real. And we always say in the group, this is a club that nobody wants to belong to.
No, nobody wants to be there. And I find that also, this happens with other kinds of grief too. People avoid talking about the deceased, and it's so important to have a space to talk about the person that they lost.
The disease, did you say?
No, the deceased. The person who died.
Deceased, yes. Yeah.
Did you find that that's also a space that they feel safe to talk about that?
And it was so helpful. It's even like in part 1 when I told you about, what was I talking about? I don't remember. But whatever it was I was talking about, it really felt good to talk about it. Maybe I was talking about how funny he was and how smart he was, and
because once death happens, it takes over, doesn't it?
Right,
and especially with suicide, it becomes a label.
Yeah,
it's the person who killed themselves.
Yeah, and I don't want to just have him in this box of somebody that killed himself. He was much more than that, and he had severe mental illness issues. And, you know, I loved him dearly. I really did. And I just don't want that. And that's what bothers me with my kids, because I don't see them really trying to develop any kind of bond even from the past Whereas for me, I just don't want him to be, oh, Dad killed himself.
Yeah.
But, the funny thing is, my son does talk to his girlfriend when he has girlfriends, which is frequently. He will talk to his girlfriends about that. So maybe that's where he's doing his work. Maybe he doesn't want to upset me. I don't know. But
so what happens when you try to talk to him?
He'll minimize it. Oh, Mom, come on. It's been 7 years since, he died or whatever. Mm-hmm. He'll say different things that really are minimizing.
Mm-hmm. You graduated from counseling. How many years after his death? Was it 3, 4 years?
3.
3 years after his death. And how was it for you in the beginning? Was it triggering for you to hear stories that were similar to yours?
In grad school?
Mm-hmm. No, as a counselor, when you started
as a counselor.
Working. Yes.
I don't think so.
No?
No, I think that it was more, oh yeah, I can relate to this. And I can be there for this person because I can relate to this. Which doesn't mean I don't get triggered sometimes even now. But back then, I so wanted to be a good counselor,
Yeah.
And would just listen and
hold the pain.
Hold the pain for the client and just let them know that I'm there for them. And I was.
Did you know that that's the kind of counseling you wanted to do? Do you find that your husband's suicide guided you?
No. As a matter of fact, when I was 12 years old, I read the autobiography of Jane Addams, who started Hull House in Chicago, which was the first basic homeless shelter in the United States. And I finished that book and I said, that's what I want to do.
Wow, so you knew,
I knew
young.
Yeah, but I didn't know what field,
Of course, yeah.
And somehow I got into alcohol and drug, and then that didn't do it for me.
Didn't work for you.
And then I got into domestic violence, and that's really important to me. And then I was the director of the crisis line at Lines for Life, and so I was like immersed in it and loved it. Loved the staff, loved the volunteers, most of the callers. Yeah.
So you fell in love with that and decided that that's the thing for me professionally.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I try to do with my podcast, Leslie, is to help new counselors. What would you tell them? Let's say they have a client who comes in and this is something that scares counselors, even the most experienced ones. Mm-hmm. If a client comes in and says, I want to kill myself, what would you tell? What should they do in that kind of situation?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is tell me what's going on with you that you feel that way. And then talk more about it. Have you felt this way for a long time? Is this something new? Has something happened? What can we do to possibly make you feel better about this? And
maybe show you some options.
And also I share my story.
You think that helps?
Mm-hmm. I don't share it all the time, but I do share it with some people.
So you do self-disclosure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is an area where self-disclosure is a good one.
Yeah, because there's a myth that you shouldn't talk about it because you can put the idea in their heads or something like that. So that's a myth.
Yeah, total myth.
Yeah, you should always open up and let them talk about their pain.
Mm-hmm.
And what else? What is another intervention that you would do?
Try to get them into a group. Try to encourage them to go to a group, not get them into a group, but try to encourage them into a group. Maybe do a journal. Is there family involved?
So support system.
Right. Is there family that they can be open with? Unlike me, whose family didn't want to hear about it, but do you have a family that's willing to support you? And let's use them as a model for how you want to be. So, but I think support is the most important thing.
It is.
And also laughing.
Yeah.
You know,
Humor.
when you can get when you can when you can find humor.
Uh-huh. And when you think about it, if they came to you, they're seeking help.
Mm-hmm.
So there is ambiguity there.
Mm-hmm.
So they are not 100% sure, and that's when you can really intervene and help. If you want more information about suicide, my book is now available on Amazon, both in paperback and digital formats. Just type in the title, Understanding Suicide, or my name, Paula Fontinelli. The book was written for people like you, and it's the result of more than 10 years of conversations with families who lost loved ones to suicide, individuals who attempted suicide, specialists, and mental health professionals. Thank you for your support. Now back to the interview. Let's talk a little bit about support groups.
Okay.
Why do people come to support groups?
I think support groups have become incredibly popular over the last 40 years, starting with AA, probably. And I mean, you can go to a support group for anything now.
I know.
I
Headache.
know.
If you have a headache, you're going to have a
Where's
support
the headache
group?
support group?
No, I know.
So I think the fact that they exist and the fact that people are becoming aware that they exist, and those people that want help are willing to go.
And there is a sense that they won't be judged. I think that's
totally.
that's a huge reason why they come.
And I've seen some counselors that judge, and
that's unfortunate. Yeah.
Drives me crazy.
Yeah. Can you walk us through, for someone who has never been to a support group,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe they're listening to us?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens in a typical day in a support group?
Well, I'll go into detail. We do it I'm not doing a group currently. I'm planning a new group. And the last group I was doing, every 2 weeks we would do a group, and I'd always bring snacks and stuff. And
do they present their stories first? I mean, how does the session go?
I like things to be free-flowing. I really do. I don't like it when we go around the room and everybody tells their story, and plus it's the same story from the week before and the week before that. And I know it's important, but I think there's other things that are important too. What have you done for yourself since you were last in group? You know, how's that going starting up with school to work in this field? So to show interest in what they're doing and to acknowledge they're making so much progress. And when they're not making progress, remind them that it takes time. It takes time.
Yes, and that's very important because of what we were talking about before, the pressure that we have to get over it, to be done with grief.
Oh, and we talk about that a lot because they've all heard it.
What are the recurrent themes that show up in group?
Get over it.
Mm-hmm. So that's a big one.
That's a big one. That's a really big one. People not wanting to talk about it. You know, so for example, I had a couple in a group and their son died and they wanted to talk and their friends didn't. They didn't know what to say. So that's another one. Loneliness. You know, like in my case, I became a widow. I'll tell you, I wasn't expecting to be a widow at that age.
No. How old were you?
I was 30.
Wow. That's very young.
So, you know, loneliness, but having goals.
That's important.
That's really important, I think.
That's one, you know, Leslie, that's one thing that I've always wondered about support group. When is it, because I understand, and just so that the listener, or the person who is listening now understands, this is how I met Leslie. Mm-hmm. I actually was searching for a support group myself, and I have to tell a story about this, and I don't think I ever told you this. I remember when I called you, I was actually searching for a support group because I had to have a few hours, I think 10 hours at least, of some kind of support group for school because I'm finishing my master's in counseling as well. And I searched for suicide, but I really didn't think that I needed it. I had never been.
Of course not.
Of course not. We never do, right? And I remember when I called you, I was more concerned about the fact of confidentiality and all of that. And so I don't know if they will ever allow me to be present as a student and listen to their stories. And then I called you and I said, hi, I presented myself and I was very honest about it. So I need to get some hours from group and I saw you online and I think that would be the right group for me. But do you think that it would be okay for me to come? And I remember the first thing you said, what do you have a history of suicide in your family? And I said, yes, I lost my father to suicide. And you said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And that changed it all for me.
In what respect?
Well, because I wasn't calling in my mind. I wasn't calling because I needed to work through my grief. In my head, I was done with that years ago. I was done with my grief. But the moment you said, I'm sorry to hear that, I didn't know what to say. I was so emotional. Then I said, wow, I was not expecting that. So this is something that I'm revealing to you now.
Thank you.
And that really made me feel that, okay, this is the right group for me. I need to go through this kind of collective grief process. So it was very rich for me. But I did go to the support group for almost a year. And I used to think, going back to where I started, I used to look at them, and some people were there for a year, some people were there for 2 years. And I said, wow, when does it become not as healing for some people because they seem to be stuck on their grief? So when you said establish goals is important, that's what I remembered. I used to think, how long is this healthy for? So is there an answer for that, Leslie? Is there a timetable, or is there a duration that maybe a support group is not as healthy? That's a question that I always had.
I will say to a person or to a couple, it really seems like you've done your work here. Are you ready to leave, or do you want to stay? I mean, people can stay,
of course, yeah.
But if they're just spinning their wheels, is that helpful for them? Now, some people too, which is really interesting, start doing their own type of volunteer work because they've picked that up from the group. So I think the group just offers so many things. So many things.
It is the most helpful from what I've learned and I've studied. It is the most helpful thing, isn't it? That and therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still the best way to feel comfortable talking about this, because it is such a difficult theme to even bring to even those. I find that even those people, your friends or family, who feel comfortable and they don't shy away from the word suicide and they talk about it freely. After a while, you feel that, okay, I shouldn't talk about this anymore because people are tired of it. And in support groups, it's different. That's what they're here for. So just talk for as long as you want and be there for as long as you want.
Exactly.
So would you say that that's the number one thing for survivors?
Well, I think the number one thing for survivors is to be heard and to realize that people care and people have empathy, and that they in turn can pass that on.
And there's no judgment.
Right.
That's one of the key things.
No judgment. Yeah.
You can cry and everybody will be okay with it.
Yeah. And if there is judgment, I try to gently nip that in the bud.
Yeah. How do you deal with that?
Paula, I'm wondering why you're saying that to Leslie. Does that bring up something for you?
I see.
So recognize that it's happening. Don't shame.
And address it.
And maybe it is bringing up something for you,
as we said before, it's the same when you're angry at the person who took their own life. Sometimes your anger is projected and you're angry at yourself.
Exactly.
So it's important to look at that. Okay, do you find that there is anything else to add?
One thing, if you do this work that you and I are doing, the average, after about 7 years, you've had one person kill themselves. Okay, so that's the average. When I was working in a domestic violence agency, and I had a woman who she'd come up from Arizona with her partner. She was Hispanic, didn't know any English. She knew English, pardon me. She had no friends. A delightful woman, really just very sweet, but so scared. And her partner was in jail because she had filed a restraining order, and after she filed it, she regretted it, but she couldn't do anything about it. And so she started to see me every day, and every day she would talk about she was going to kill herself. And so we would do plans. We would do all sorts of plans, and I would listen. I would listen, and we would plan and
safety plans.
Safety plans. And I just remember coming into work one Monday morning, and it was an interesting program that we had because we had police officers, we had counselors, we had school counselors, just a different variety of professionals. And the police officer said to me, "Yeah, I need to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Kathy killed herself last night. Kathy's not her name."
Of course.
And I said, because one of the things that had happened 3 days before, I finally made the decision to send her to the hospital.
Yes.
She sat in the hospital, in the ER, for 4 hours. So that was a good lesson for me, that you don't send somebody to the hospital alone. And that night she killed herself, and it was so poignant because she used cold duck, that champagne that's not really champagne. And she took pills, and she left me a note. And I think that if you're doing this work, you need to be prepared that occasionally, maybe once, maybe more than once, you're going to have this.
And especially if you work with grief.
But you know what? I love this work.
It must have been very painful for you because you really tried, and you were present, and you did what you could.
It was painful because she was so sweet and so alone. That you and I both know that's
the number one trigger for anyone.
So alone. Yeah. And even though her partner was in jail, she wanted him back
because she didn't want to be alone anymore. Yeah. It's one of those hard choices, but as human beings, that's what we want. We want relationships. We want humanity, right?
I think people just want to know that they're heard, that they're cared about, that it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time, perhaps, and that certainly if it's me, I'll be there for you.
Thank you so much, and you were there for me. So I want you to know that. I don't think I ever told you, but you were, and you made a huge difference.
That makes me cry, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time and your kindness and your friendship. Thank you.
Back at ya.
Thank you for listening to my podcast. For more information on suicide, go to understandsuicide.com.